Good afternoon and welcome to the Zuckerman Museum of Art's last Wednesday lunch program. I'm Elizabeth Thomas, the Education and Outreach Coordinator, and today we have with us JoyEllen Williams, Special Collections Curator at the KSU Museum Archives and Rare Books, otherwise known as MARB. We asked JoyEllen to share her expertise here to expand on the artifacts she worked with our curator, Cynthia Norse Thompson, to contribute to our current exhibition, Walk in Beauty. Walk in Beauty is an exhibition of works by Native American artists in our permanent collection, as well as works created by Native American artists at Crow's Shadow Institute of Art on the Umatilla Reservation in Oregon, and artifacts from the Cherokee collection in MARB. We're grateful she's willing to be with us and enlighten us further on that collection. In her role, she manages collection development, collection management, outreach initiatives, and exhibitions for the Bentley Rare Book Museum. JoyEllen is a certified archivist and holds a bachelor's degree in English from the University of Georgia and a master's degree in archival studies from Clayton State University. She serves as a governor-appointed member of the Georgia Historical Records Advisory Council and as a board member for the Society of American Archivists Publications Board. She's a host of the Archives in Context podcast and a founding member of the Atlanta Black Archives Alliance. JoyEllen has published articles and chapters in various professional publications, including Archival Issues, Participatory Heritage, Archival Outlook, and Pushing the Margins, Women of Color and Intersectionality in Library Information Sciences. Thank you for joining us, JoyEllen. I will turn it over to you.
Archives and Special Collections and the Bentley Rare Book Museum at Kennesaw State University strive to collect and document the voices of Indigenous people who endured past atrocities and of their descendants who speak their truths today through the printed word. So again, I'm so glad to be with you all today. During this presentation, I will introduce you to the concept of primary sources and archives, maybe something that many of you are actually very familiar with, but we'll just kind of review it a little bit. And then I will highlight the Bentley Rare Book Museum's collection of printed materials relating to the Cherokee Nation. I will discuss collection efforts of the past, current preservation considerations, and future directions for the collection. And I'm going to end up sharing my screen, and I'll be working from a module that I created for university students here at KSU. So it's a self-guided module that's actually accessible through our website. And if you're interested in it, please do, at the end of the presentation, I'll share our Rare Books email, and please do let me know. But since I'm presenting the module to you live, I am gonna skip some parts and just so to be a little bit more conversational. And please know that everything that you see in the module, all the materials are actually physically featured in the Bentley Rare Book Museum. And many of the materials that you see are featured in the Zuckerman Museum of Art's newest exhibition, Walk in Beauty. I would also like to just make a special shout out to Adam Dosky. Thank you so much for being here. Adam was a previous curator here in the Bentley Rare Book Museum, and he was largely responsible for jumpstarting the Cherokee materials, the Cherokee collection area that we have. So thank you, Adam, and we are so appreciative. All right, so I'm going to share my screen now. All right, it's loading. All right. I always like to start with this quote that is in a reference book that I used when I was doing some work getting our collection, kind of trying to really intellectually understand the collection that we have. And the quote says, "American Indians have been viewed as a vanishing people. We have been seen as a thing of the past. We all have the responsibility now to restore the dignity that has been denied to us as a people and to breathe life into the cultural objects that have been preserved." So that is a quote from Catherine Jody Beaulieu, who's part of the Anishinaabe Ojibwe tribe. And I wanted to just us to think about that throughout the presentation, and let's keep it in the back of our minds, and because it's really impacting not only what we collect, but kind of how we frame it in the KSU and the Rare Book program. So I want you to just keep that in the back of your mind. So first, I'd like to challenge everyone here to think back to history classes that you may have taken early on in your life, maybe your early classes in primary or secondary school. You may have gotten the impression that history occurred exactly the way your textbook presented it. But in reality, history is much more messy and complex than that. History is human, and history is a multitude of stories. And so you may have encountered the term primary sources before. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about primary sources and archives and how they help us to understand the complexities of the past. So you may have heard the term primary sources in contrast to secondary sources. Well, just as a review, primary sources are materials that contain firsthand accounts of events. And these materials were either created at the time of the event or they were later recalled by an eyewitness. In contrast, secondary sources were created by individuals who didn't have direct observation of the event, but instead relied on primary sources to interpret the event. So let's talk about primary sources and how diverse they can be. Examples of primary sources can include diaries, photographs, personal notes, correspondence, business documents, government records, newspapers, website content, social media, film, et cetera, et cetera. They are very diverse, both in format and content, and they can be analog or born digital. Another thing I like to mention is that primary sources, they don't have to be things that are written or printed. Oral storytelling is a form of primary source, and that actually might be the preferred method of recording experiences in some communities, specifically in some indigenous communities. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And that brings us to an idea of primary sources that are of value. Who decides what is of value? How do we determine that? And that brings us to a discussion of archives. And here I have kind of a formal definition of what archives are. But in short, archives are records that are preserved because of their enduring value. So essentially, although primary sources and archives, those terms are often used interchangeably, archives are those select primary sources that we choose to keep because they are valuable in some way. And again, value, who decides what's valuable, that is a subjective thing. But an archivist is a person who identifies, collects, and preserves archival materials and makes them available to the public. So let's look at a real life example from the rare book collection. So we're going to take a look here at this archival map. And before we even get started, I want to show this and remind everyone that it's important to think about the historic record kind of holistically and to remember that not everything is saved. I mean, that would be impossible. But it's important for us to know that and to speak that because it helps us understand the full landscape of the historic record and what biases may have existed that would have kept something saved or not. Another thing that I like to mention is that some records are saved, but we just don't see, they don't have their original context maybe, or there could be something missing from them. So we're going to use this map to kind of let that play out a bit. So this is a map and it's by itself, it looks a little bit alone maybe. But there's plenty of information that we can glean from it. And often when we're looking at archives, it's not going to always tell us maybe absolutely everything we want to know. But let's start with what we do know, what we can find. We see that at the bottom left-hand corner, we have a title, A New Map of the Cherokee Nation. That's interesting because, well, new map, what does that imply? That there was an old map or that this is documenting some kind of change. We're not sure what change, but a change. This map also doesn't have an exact date on it, but there are clues. Again, over here, right above the title, we see a little note that a colonel wrote in 1746, ... We're like, okay, so this is a post-1746 map. And again, it's alone, and we don't see any other accompanying text to this map, but we do have at the top, it says for the London magazine. That gives us a clue, okay? So it was in a British publication. And we see at the bottom a little something, it's easy to miss, but it says engraved from an Indian draft by T. Kitchen. And that gives us something that we can use to do additional research. Maybe we can bring in some secondary sources and figure out who T. Kitchen is. For those who want to know, Thomas Kitchen was a British cartographer. And I went down a rabbit hole with this item, which was so interesting to look at. And I'll kind of summarize my findings that this was actually published in the London magazine in February 1760. I was able to also find that the New York Public Library and the Huntington Library Museum have copies. And then I used another item from the rare book collection. I recently acquired this book from 1779, a historical account of the rise and progress of the colonies of South Carolina and Georgia. So I acquired this from a rare book dealer. And one thing that I was interested in is that in one of the chapters, it talks about according to this text, it calls it the Cherokee War. But really what it's referring to is the Anglo-Cherokee War, which took place kind of within the French and Indian War. And actually this map here, later was able to put everything together, that's what this map is likely depicting, because of many Cherokee towns and rivers that we see here, many Cherokee towns were obliterated actually, or changed because of the Anglo-Cherokee War. And I believe that this map is trying to depict that for a British audience. And I am not confirmed, it probably is unlikely that the cartographer actually ever saw this land. So that's something to keep in mind. And then here, this engraved from an Indian draft. That's another thing about the historic record. I'm wondering, where is that drawing? How come the indigenous drawing, I don't know where that is, and what did that look like, and what did Mr. Kitchen decide to change? And those are the kinds of things that as we look at archival materials, especially those materials that are documenting groups that have been historically marginalized, it's really important to see, okay, is this an archival document that is created by the community or about them? And then if so, what kind of angle might this be coming at? So just to kind of keep that in mind as we continue to look through some materials. And so that was just kind of an introduction. But we're gonna go ahead and fast forward and see some other materials that we have here in the collection. And I want to say that we are continuing to add to this collection, and our goal is to document Georgia's Cherokee past through print. So we're not collecting necessarily everything about the Cherokee Nation or tons of artifacts, but we want to make sure that we are collecting materials respectfully, but that also relate very closely to our region. And I think I'm going to talk a little bit about these protocols later. I want to get to the materials first, and then I'll talk about some of the things that are kind of some of the considerations for future collecting. This is one of our premier pieces. We have one issue of the Cherokee Phoenix from 1830. So I'm going to go ahead and share this. So we acquired this from an independent press in North Carolina, Speakeasy Press, back in 2013. And this piece is really, really amazing because the Cherokee Phoenix was the first Native American newspaper published in the US. And our issue is from Christmas Day, 1830. So it was a bilingual newspaper established by Samuel Worcester, a white missionary among the Cherokees, and Elias Boutno, a prominent Cherokee Nation member. And it's kind of hard to see here, but it is actually bilingual. So part of it is in English and part of it is in Cherokee. It's not half and half. I think it ended up being more so like just maybe like 1/5 Cherokee. But it's really interesting to see because the Cherokee Phoenix was printed at New Echota, which is really, if those, for many of us may have actually gone to the New Echota site up near Calhoun, Georgia. And so it was printed there, and they often, this is a publication that came from the Cherokee Nation. However, again, we know that archival materials are multifaceted and they are complicated. So interesting thing about the Cherokee Phoenix is that the bias and opinions of its editors were pretty apparent. So we can read it realizing, okay, this may not be, this doesn't represent the voice of, every person in the Cherokee Nation. It was largely influenced by whoever was editing it and printing it and how they felt about things happening. But it's a really invaluable resource because in this Cherokee Phoenix, specifically this one published in 1830, we see that we're able to see kind of the issues and what was on the minds of Cherokee people during this era of Indian removal, Native American removal, as they called it. And so the Cherokee Phoenix is still published today, is still in print. It went through a couple different kind of breaks and publishing periods, but it's very hard nowadays to find this such an early issue. And as we can see, it does have some conservation issues. So I'm actually in the process now of developing a fundraiser to raise money to do some conservation work on this Cherokee Phoenix, and so that it can persist into the future. So this is one of our really exciting items. Some additional items that we acquired around the same time. I'm going to skip this part and we're going to go down. Some items that we acquired around the same time, and then some that I acquired later, are pieces that, printed pieces that show the Cherokee Nation and show assimilation as well. So around 2014, we acquired quite a few pieces that show that are religious in nature, specifically materials that are Christian, of the Christian religion, but have been translated into the Cherokee language, like the Gospel of Matthew here, translated in, or printed at least in 1850. So we can actually see what the Cherokee syllabary looks like printed. You can see that more up close. A Cherokee hymn book. This is actually as late as the 1940s. And then quite recently, I acquired this 1860 printing of the New Testament of the Christian Bible that has been translated into the Cherokee Nation. And this has its own really interesting history because back in the 1820s and when Sequoyah first created the syllabary, there were kind of bits and pieces of the Bible that were translated into the Cherokee Nation. The Cherokee had been, or missionaries had been living among the Cherokee since the 18th century. So this was something that they often dealt with. But finally, in 1860, the American Bible Society brought many of these kind of ad hoc translations together for the first time and printed the New Testament of the Bible fully into the Cherokee Nation. And this is featured in the Walk in Beauty exhibition. This is a really interesting piece. And again, shows that and demonstrates how assimilated many members of the Cherokee Nation were to European culture. Finally, I want to show, just as we kind of get more, as we get closer to showing where the collection is going, I'd like to show some pieces that are really fascinating that we were able to acquire in 2014. So for those who may not be as familiar with Georgia's land lottery system, well, let's go back to 1830s, 1831. the state of Georgia kind of named this this vast amount of land that belonged to the Cherokee people. They named it Cherokee County. There was so much land that they divided it into 10 smaller counties, and from there into sections and districts. And the state of Georgia created a land lottery that allowed certain citizens, the Georgia Archives website has a very wonderful listing of exactly who was able to get land, who was able to enter this lottery. So the state of Georgia decided to redistribute Cherokee land to eligible citizens, which is interesting because we have here, we can see this is actually what a land survey would have looked like for a parcel of land a parcel of Cherokee land. So what I find fascinating is that this plat was surveyed. We have a date here, surveyed the 4th day of June, 1832. 1832 is the same year that the Supreme Court actually declared that the Cherokee Nation was a sovereign nation in the court case Worcester versus Georgia. But it's interesting that the historic record, we know that part of history, but the historic record is also showing us that at that same year, the state of Georgia was literally surveying land to be allocated to other citizens, and was literally going in and drawing up these land surveys to distribute to other citizens. So it's just interesting that we are seeing two different sides of the historic record. And then in 1838, in February 1838, just a few months before the Trail of Tears, that as we know it, commenced, we see that Mr. Reuben Goolsby, that same plat of land here, number 943, we see it was granted to Mr. Reuben Goolsby, who lived in Upson County. And we see that he was officially given this land. So we are able to see kind of this Native American removal, Cherokee removal playing out through the records, which is it's tragic, it's powerful, and it's really seeing it kind of raw. The raw records are showing us what was going on. Through one man's story, we're seeing, that this was happening this was happening all over, Georgia. People were entering this lottery and getting land. And so really wanted to show that and make it real, because again, this happened not too far from where we are today. Both of these pieces are featured in the Walk in Beauty exhibition in the ZMA. So please do take a minute to go see those. In addition, in our collection, we have numerous government documents as well, or copies of government documents that are leading up to the Trail of Tears, and they often look like these records of congressional sessions from the 19th century. So those are really interesting to study pieces, and again, they deal mostly with the Trail of Tears and the period of Native American removal. But they're very interesting research pieces. These were also acquired in around 2014 when we really got our Cherokee collection started. And finally, I'd like to talk about kind of what we're doing moving forward. And while we are so glad that we have many of these materials that document the Cherokee Nation during the time of removal, it's very important because, again, it's important for our students and for them to understand and to be able to see the records that show that. However, what we don't want to do is to make, feed into the idea that Indigenous people or Cherokee people are a thing of the past or they're ancient relics. And so we are trying to also collect printed pieces that go beyond this. specifically collecting works of contemporary fiction or science fiction by writers like Diane Glancy or Mary Lou Awiakta. So here we have, I recently acquired 2 fiction pieces called Pushing the Bear and Flutie by Diane Glancy. Both of these are first editions and signed. And then also very recently acquired a volume of poetry called Abiding Appalachia by a Cherokee writer, Mary Lou Awiakta, who talks about her time growing up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee during the period where the Manhattan Project had taken over her ancestral lands, and she tackles that through her poetry. Her love for the mountains, and also the idea of the atom and its power. So trying to do some new and interesting things while also remaining respectful. The Society of American Archivists codified protocols about how to collect Indigenous materials. So I've been using that as a guide. Also, Dr. Miriam Brown Spires, who is a professor of English and American Studies and who leads our Native American and Indigenous program here, actually gave us a wonderful talk during one of my virtual Coffee with a Curator programs. And so I'll put that into the chat, the recording of that program. But I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and just want to thank you all so much, and wanted to show you all a little bit about our program, about our rare book program and what we've been collecting, and what our future goals are, how we're trying to take care of the materials that we have, use them, and then also go into some new exciting directions. And I will go ahead and put the recording of Dr. Miriam Brown Spires' talk into the chat so everyone can enjoy that. But with that, I am ready to take any questions or comments. I know that I didn't leave a whole lot of time, but I think I can take a few quick ones if there are any. Okay, I just added that into the chat there.
Hi, JoyEllen, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
I'm interested to hear more about the guidelines that you're using to acquire more pieces for the collection, because the justice of that and making sure that it's done ethically is very important to me. So I'm just curious to hear more about kind of that process.
Sure. Thank you so much for bringing that up. So there are 2 main things that I use. Of course, we have what I've been using, since we are not really collecting artifacts, and that's what NAGPRA, I think, in the 1990s was meant to do. It left a lot out. It was mainly to stop a lot of museums that were really stealing Indigenous artifacts and not informing the nations or tribes, and a lot of them were more ceremonial pieces. So that was specifically for that. However, in 2006, a group of archivists got together, and mainly archivists from various Indigenous communities got together to create a set of guidelines for how archivists should work collaboratively and respectfully with Indigenous groups while also collecting Indigenous material. Because as you can imagine, it became kind of in vogue to, represent historically marginalized communities in your archives. So everyone wants to do it. Everyone wants to grab and collect, but this group actually got together and created a set of guidelines that actually gives transfers agency from the collecting repository to the nation or tribe that they are working with. And so I've been really trying to do that. I held back in 2017, I held a community group, a kind of a workshop where I brought together members from the community, many members from the Georgia chapter of the Trail of Tears, to kind of chat with them about what I'm doing. Many of them are from Indigenous descent, some aren't. Also, I went to some other various groups where I wanted to just reach out and talk about what I'm trying to do and how I can do that respectfully. So the guidelines actually that the Society of American Archivists officially, it took them a while to officially endorse them, because back in 2006, when they were written, they were considered quite radical, because again, agency was being taken from the repository to the people that created these. So that was a lot, but the guidelines are freely available. So I'm going to try to find that for you, and I'll put it into the chat so that I can, the protocols, I'm going to try to put that in there so you can see them. But thank you for asking about that. And I'm constantly trying to learn, and make sure that I just remain in contact with the groups that we want to collect, so that they know what we're doing, and I want to make sure that this group is being represented the way they want to be represented.
So I guess I have a question then. Would the items that are on display here at the museum not be considered artifacts?
Well, the way that I say, when I think about artifacts, and again, I'm an archivist, so I can get super technical, but many people would consider them artifacts. I guess what I'm trying to do is, I think sometimes I try to manage expectations, because I don't want people to think that we necessarily have, I guess you could say, like kind of three-dimensional things, like, even clothing, or maybe, pottery. So I try to just kind of manage expectations, especially since people are going to, may wonder, why are you not collecting that? Our goal with the Rare Book Room, the Rare Book Museum, is to focus on the history of the printed word. So you're right, they are artifacts in a way. I just, trying to help people understand that we're actually not going to be, collecting more of those 3D materials. We're focusing specifically on printed text. But thank you for mentioning that.
Oh, sure, thank you. It's definitely different. You wouldn't find paper materials on an archaeological dig very easily.
Exactly. So Laura, that's a really great question. So for me, I wouldn't say that I didn't, many of the pieces, the only pieces that I showed that actually were created by the Cherokee Nation would have been the Cherokee Phoenix. So that's a great point. I didn't necessarily get, that's one that I have shown without asking anyone from the Cherokee Nation. So that's a good point. I should, just to make sure I didn't get permission for that one, but that's the only piece we have that was specifically created by the Cherokee Nation. The rest of them were not created. So that's something that we're working on. I felt okay, sharing Mary Lou Awiatka's poetry, of course, because that was a published work that she did. And she's of Cherokee descent, and that is her published work. So I felt comfortable with that, but thank you for that question. Oh, and about the fundraiser, yes, this is a one that I'm really excited about, because our Cherokee Phoenix issue is, I was able to digitize it. It's safe enough where I can actually, digitize it, but it's actually not really something that I can bring out to too many audiences, because it needs to be mended. The paper has been ripped in so many ways, and it's kind of it needs to either be lined, fully lined, or mended by a conservator. And so I'm actually going to be fundraising for that project and two others. We've got two other really great pieces in our collection that need, really prominent pieces that need conservation work. So it's a large scale fundraiser that's going to encompass conservation work, outreach for the pieces, and also perhaps some collection development. So you'll be hearing more about that. And thank you so much for wanting to contribute. There will be numerous ways to do that, and we'll be putting more information out there in the future, especially on our social media too. I'll put our social media, we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at KSU Rare Books. So I like to provide updates there. And then you can always email rarebooks@kennesaw.edu is our email. And then I'll put our website into the chat. And we have a support button on there as well. So you can obviously support us if you ever like to. My last note is also that our museum is open to the public Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. in the Sturgis, on the ground floor of the Horace W. Sturgis Library. So please do come and take a look if you like.
Well, this has been a real treat to have you with us, JoyEllen. Thank you for all the information that you've shared. It was very interesting. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I'm so glad to have you. Thank you for your time.
Thank
I'll give
you.
a plug for our museum too. We are open Tuesday through Friday, 10 to 5, and on Saturdays from noon to 5. And this program does repeat every last Wednesday of the month from 12:30 to 1-ish, whenever we wrap it up. In February, we're going to hear from Katie Terry, one of the exhibiting project wall artists on display now in the museum. We'll hear from Kyle Holland, an artist, a book artist, about works that are going to be in the exhibition In Conversation, the Fluid and the Concrete, which will be in our Fine Arts Gallery in March. In April, we'll hear from Cynthia Norris Thompson, our Director of Curatorial Affairs, about putting together the In Conversation exhibition, as well as Leonardo drew cycles from the collections of Jordan D. Schnitzer and his Family Foundation, which will open here at the museum on February 20th and run through the end of the semester. So thank you so much for coming. We hope you'll come back again. Have a great day.
Thank you.